Good afternoon and welcome. My name's Elliot Whittington. I am the Director of the European Corporate Leaders Group, or CLG Europe, and I'm very pleased to be here in the EU Pavilion here in Glasgow to host the latest of the series of great side events and activities here in the pavilion. Today we're discussing building international political collaboration to build a new net zero economy. And we have policymakers, businesses, experts all here to discuss this topic. So welcome, and I hope we're going to have a really good conversation. As part of this discussion, we're using the Slido platform. So for those of you who are listening at home, or indeed are in the room and have on your mobile phones if you want, but those of you who are listening at home, and I understand we are not only going out through the EU's platform, but also live streaming on YouTube, please do use the Slido platform to raise your questions, use the QR code there, and that will enable you to kind of raise questions that we can bring into the conversation and make it a richer, more interactive conversation. So thank you for that. So as I said, today we're talking about this topic of international collaboration. You know, this is very much part of what the COP is about. It's part of what the context of the last last week has been full of. We've seen more and more announcements of new collaborations, both in the run-up to COP, but also at COP. We've seen things like the EU-US agreement on steel, new work on methane, powering past coal, new finance agreements, and hopefully as we move forward, we're going to see a lot more of this. Real collaborations that are designed, hopefully, to deliver substantive action and impact on the business environment, on the real economy, and to change that context and power us towards a new, cleaner, competitive, more productive net zero economy. So critical part of that is not only what we all do at home in our economies, but it is about that element of collaboration, and that's what we want to talk about, that we want to discuss. So without too much further ado, so we're going to hear first from Julius Langendorf, who is a policy officer in the European Commission, before we bring in some business voices both here in the room but also internationally. So we're going to be connected to various things. But if I start with Julius, so Julius, if I could hear from you about this kind of topic and what you see as the opportunity here.
Okay, thanks very much, and happy to be here. Maybe a few remarks about the Green Deal as such, just to set the scene a bit. A few words about our climate policy and legislation, and then the international global dimension in all of that. The Green Deal, I think the important feature about the Green Deal is that it is really one of the top priorities of the current Commission and the EU as such. So it's not a sectoral policy, an environment policy, or a climate change policy. It is a very comprehensive economic policy also. So it's not only about climate change, about circular economy, about natural capital, biodiversity, but it's very much also about economic growth and also about the just transition. So it has all these elements in it. What we try to do is to do all that in all sectors, so mainstream that in all sectors, but clearly there's also a very important international dimension in it, in the sense that, of course, we're not only trying to address environmental climate problems in Europe, but by doing that we also tackle them abroad. Our EU greenhouse gas emission figure is about 7% of global emissions. That may not look that big, but still by addressing it within Europe, we're also contributing to solving it globally. And then, of course, the other dimension of that is that we want to work with others. We want to lead by example, but we also want to work with others in different ways in all these areas: climate change, circular economy, biodiversity, and so on. So clearly, that is part of the Green Deal very much also. In terms of the EU's climate change policy, we have set the net zero goal in legally binding terms in the climate law, so that's an important feature. I think we have legislation that obliges the Union to be net zero in 2050, and as a step towards that, we have also an obligation in that same climate law to be down by 55% in greenhouse gas emissions in 2030 compared to 1990 figures. So these are legally binding objectives, And we are now translating the 55% reduction goal into more specific legislation that's in the Fit for 55 package. It's a set of some 13 or 14 legislative proposals ranging from strengthening ETS to emission reductions in individual member states, to energy efficiency, renewable energy, CO2 standards in cars, and also the carbon border adjustment mechanism. Those are some of the key legislative proposals. They will have to be adopted by member states and the European Parliament, and they're currently under discussion. But clearly, we're not only saying we have goals, but what is important here is that we're also translating goals into legally binding instruments and legislation. Now, a few words about the international dimension and the instruments that we use to work with countries bilaterally, multilaterally, plurilaterally on these issues. One of the things, of course, that is very topical here at COP26 is climate finance. So we are, EU and the 27 member states, the biggest provider of climate finance in the world. We estimate that we provide some 40% at least of the total climate finance that is provided, so that's quite substantial. Another instrument, and I think we will hear some more about that, is the green alliances. So what we try to do, working with countries that have similar levels of ambition, and Japan is a case in point, where we try to work out what we call a green alliance based on a number of priorities, including energy, including also business-to-business cooperation, including things like sustainable finance. And I think the EU-Japan Green Alliance was the first to be launched earlier this year, I think in July. Some other more sectoral instruments when it comes to global cooperation, and again we saw a good example of what can be done earlier this week when a number of partners launched with South Africa the Just Energy Transition Partnership, an 8.5 billion partnership to decarbonize South African energy sector, electricity sector, away from coal, but also with a strong social just transition component in it. So that is clearly, we hope, also a template for what can be done with other countries in terms of sectoral cooperation. In this case, in the energy sector. With the US. We are launching, or we intend to launch, a Green Tech Alliance. I think maybe if there's a US speaker on the panel, we hear a bit about that. So at the EU-US summit in July, we announced this Green Tech Alliance. When we look at other areas, for example, resource efficiency, green, or circular economy, we're trying to push for a global agreement on ways to tackle plastics. We have an alliance on circular economy with other countries, and we have bilateral outreach. There are all kinds of ways in which we try to make the Green Deal work for others, and also try to share experiences that we have with other countries, and of course also learn from them. Another example is the way we design our trade agreements, where we try in all trade agreements to have sustainable development chapters with more specific areas of cooperation in terms of trade, for example, standards, or liberalization, trade in environmental goods and services, and deep kind of things. So there are many areas and many tools, sectoral, more horizontal, where we really try to work with others, because we realize, of course, that the final objective of Green Deal can only be achieved if we do it together with others. We can never do that on our own. We can do what we can do, but we can only make it really work, all these global problems, if we do it with others.
A great note to finish on, absolutely. And I should say, by the way, I'm sorry, although we have been seeking a US speaker, we've not been able to be joined by somebody from the US, although you will be hearing from business voices from within Europe, and also insights from Japan and South Africa. So that's going to be a key part of the conversation, and really helpful, some examples that you've just talked about there. I just wanted to ask you, so you've talked there about the value of Fit for 55, the value of the Green Deal in terms of not only sort of taking Europe's climate neutrality goal, taking Europe's net zero goal, and showing how the bloc plans to deliver on it, kind of giving it substance, giving it kind of real delivery. And at the moment, I think one of the kind of things that we're hearing a lot about at this moment is the growth in net zero. That over the last 2 years, we've gone from sort of 20-30% of the economy being under net zero, of the global economy being under net zero goals, to 80-90% of the economy. So net zero is an idea that has very much come. We are seeing a huge number of new countries undertaking those goals, and that's really valuable. Do you find, in terms of what you hear about, in terms of the engagements that you're having internationally, some of the conversations you might be having here, is it useful that Europe has that kind of additional depth, that additional credibility? And is that something that you are keen to discuss with other countries in terms of finding out their own approach, their own plans for kind of delivering on these goals?
No, we think, of course, that it is crucial to lead by example. We do it for ourselves. But we also want to show that we can do it. We have to lead by example. If we don't do it, then of course our credibility is seriously undermined. And in our outreach with other countries, our Vice President Timmermans will be here later this week. Of course, when he talks to other countries, whether it's South Africa, Indonesia, Asian countries, it is very important that he can indeed tell the others that we're not only setting these goals, pies in the sky, but we're actually following up, and that's what we do through our legislation. And we put money to it. Another important part of that, of course, is aligning financial flows in terms of our whole sustainable finance action program, taxonomy, disclosure legislation, and so on and so on. So all these things are very important to show that we're serious about it, and that we can indeed do more than just announce goals, but they're backed up by concrete action and legislation.
Absolutely. And then obviously you work particularly on climate finance, and obviously that's a key topic in terms of how we're mobilizing the resources. Do you find, is there a linkage between the leadership that Europe has to show in terms of providing finance that you've talked about, and its leadership on thinking about the financial frameworks, so sustainable finance? So there is things like the taxonomy, all of these other areas. How much of a linkage is there between the conversations around making sure that the public finance flows, and also engaging in that wider conversation about shifting private finance?
Well, what we, of course, we do indeed believe that it's very important to deliver, for example, on the $100 billion goal. That public finance can play an important role, international public finance, but that is only one part of the story. It can never do the whole thing. So you need to go beyond that and look beyond that in terms of aligning your own financial flows, domestic, private, and public. That requires looking at things like subsidies, things like public procurement, and so on and so on. But other countries will also have to look at their own financial flows. So the international public finance debate, which is extremely important and on which there's a lot of focus, is only part of the broader picture. We can only really transform the economy and get to net zero globally if we also look at other financial flows, and if we do it internationally and domestically. So I don't know if that's an answer to your question, but clearly things go hand in hand, but there's that much larger picture about the trillions and not the billions.
Absolutely. Okay, so I'm sure we'll come back to you with questions, and I again remind people about the Slido platform if they have questions for any of the panelists, but let me bring in some other voices at this point. So, as I said, we're joined by a couple of European businesses, both here and internationally, and so the first speaker I'm going to ask to join us for commenting from a European business perspective is a member of the Corporate Leaders Group, the European Corporate Leaders Group, and a friend of ours, so Miguel Munoz Rodriguez, who is part of the Chairman's Office at Iberdrola, a European but also globally significant energy company, who works particularly on the climate change policy. Miguel, how do you see this kind of topic of international collaboration, and where do you see some of the really big opportunities lying?
Thank you, Elliot, for inviting me to join this interesting event. I don't want to look at me at the screen at the same time. Oh, I'm joking. No, I think some of the key issues have been already mentioned here. I think that policy signals are crucial and alliances. From the policy signal side, I think that we are lucky to be in Europe. We have the Fit for 55 package, and it is a very comprehensive tool to start working intensively in the delivery area. No? We have a lot of commitments, we have the climate neutrality goal, but we have to start from a business side, of course, to deliver the achievements that we need, the climate solutions that we have to provide. From a global perspective, I think it will be important to take away some of the key issues of these frameworks, the experiences, the successful experiences from the European policy side, of course, and we can translate, of course, taking into account the local perspective, these successful stories, because the policy signals are crucial to invest in the climate solutions, in energy, but in other sectors also. From the point of view of partnerships, I will tell you some examples from our side, maybe are useful. From our side, we have two kinds of partnership: industrial partnerships across the value chain. We are working intensively with some providers, with some industries to help them to decarbonize. For example, we are producing green hydrogen and developing partnerships with fertilizers, with oil refineries, even with whiskey distilleries. So we will support them in the process. We are also working very intensively in the offshore wind industry with some industry providers that were focused on the oil and gas industry, and now they are constructing and building schemes and some parts of our windmills. So they are having a new business area, a new source of growth for them. We are also developing intense partnerships in the transport area. We want to, of course, promote electrification of transport and through that way to decarbonize transport. And we are having partnerships with automakers, also with retailers. We are installing, only in Spain, we will install more than 150,000 charging points by 2024, and we are doing partnerships with local authorities to do this, to deploy this huge amount of charging points. This is from an industrial, a business side, a value chain perspective. But this is not enough. I think we have to engage with other stakeholders beyond our own industry, beyond our own value chain. So we are working intensively with global alliances such as you, the Corporate Leader Group, but also very engaged in alliances such as the SME Climate Hub from Women Business. We think that small and medium companies are crucial if we want to meet the 1.5 scenario. They are 90% of the economy. And we are supporting the SME Climate Hub, for example, in Spain, through the Spanish Green Growth Group. We are also working intensely with other industries in a global alliance, such as the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, in different working groups, in energy, also in materials. So I think it's important not only to focus on your own industries, but also cross-cutting alliances. And as it has been mentioned at the beginning of the event, policy signals are crucial. We should be able to pick up some of the key successful stories on this regard from the different areas in the world. For businesses, it's very important to have these policy signals to invest.
Absolutely, thank you, Miguel. And that's, I mean, very clear, very kind of articulate. You've set out that kind of range and that breadth. One of the things that struck me listening to you talking about the things that you said, as you, in your words, of focusing on your own industry, is how cross-sectoral they were. So you are kind of working with your value chain, but you're also, you're working with steel companies, you're working in the transport sector. Does that feel like a key characteristic of this change, of this kind of work?
Yes, of course. For example, you were talking, and I was thinking about other coalition, the European Roundtable of Industry. Most of you know it, and there we have to have a conversation with some of the companies are our clients. We are talking with the steel makers, chemical industry. Yeah, because the European Commission, of course, can have a broader picture on this. But if you want to achieve the net zero pathway, you have to get all the business, all the society in general on board. And you have to, in some way, collaborate, because you are sometimes you are a provider, sometimes you are a client, but you have to have this conversation. And in this conversation, and it is our experience, sometimes you will find opportunities. Okay. Because when I have a conversation with an industry, sometimes I can sell this industry a power purchase agreement on RES, on renewables, a PPA. Also, I can have a long-term contract to supply green hydrogen. There are different opportunities, business opportunities. Of course, we are talking about business opportunities also.
Absolutely. So hopefully I should be able to be joined by another European business voice, but they're joining us remotely. So we should have on the line, we should have Erika Mink, the Head of Government Affairs for ThyssenKrupp Steel Europe. So I'm kind of looking at the screen. I'm hoping that Erika will be able to appear and we're able to hear her perspective. Erika, great that you're able to join us, and great to have, to be actively demonstrating the new hybrid meeting space that I think we're all entering into. So Erika, hopefully you've been able to follow the conversation so far, and I just wonder what your perspective from a kind of a globally, an industry which is key in almost every economy and which is kind of fundamental, but also, has that kind of particular characteristic in terms of being traded. How do you feel about the opportunities and the risks and the challenges in terms of building these new international collaborations?
Yes, thank you very much. But first, let me say I'm really sad to be not to be with you and not to experience the great energy that is happening and going on with you guys over there in Glasgow. But at least, we have this opportunity to talk virtually. So from the ThyssenKrupp Steel is a European, large international European steel producer running in Germany, the biggest integrated steel mill in Europe and one of the top 5 in terms of size and capacity in the world. And decarbonization, it is a massive task for us. We will heavily depend on the availability of green hydrogen. So that's the way to decarbonize primary steel production. And that also already alludes, to what's needed in terms of collaboration. I think the previous speaker mentioned it. We're talking about a system. We need a system change, and as has been said, this happens along the value chain, but it also happens cross-sectoral. So in case of the steel industry, a lot of collaboration is needed and it's ongoing. It starts with with building and collaborating in building a hydrogen economy. So obviously, being and having our primary production in Europe. So we first and foremost, so far, work closely with European companies, with companies such as Air Liquide in France and others also in Germany and in Holland. But if we look at the hydrogen economy, so we know today that Germany will only be able to produce probably some sort of 15%, some say 20% of the hydrogen it will need in order to decarbonize industries and to meet demand. And if we look at the projections for the EU, we also see there that we may be able to produce half of the hydrogen demand that's needed to decarbonize and to get to climate neutrality by 2050. So that already indicates, that there is a big question on and a big need to collaborate with countries, with North Africa, with countries in Latin America, and also in Asia. So there we will need rules, we will need agreements, we will need to figure out, what's the best and the cheapest way to produce green hydrogen, and what's the most effective applications. And we would always opt, to use it there where we have the biggest impact in terms of CO2 reduction. So hydrogen, big area for collaboration. We are part of the Green Hydrogen Alliance set up by the European Commission, which is an excellent platform to further develop the thinking and also for collaboration. But we believe, it will go and it will have to go beyond Europe. Then another area, critically important is collaboration on technology. So we have technology. So we have the technology to decarbonize. Now we have to deploy it and to scale it. And there, Fit for 55 in a European context sets the regulatory framework, and really we have to make sure that it is a tool that that fosters and supports investments in the transformation. But also, we think also here, the technology we have developed can be used by most of the integrated steel mills we have around the world. So also here, technology collaboration will be critical in the future to help, to collaborate on decarbonization of the steel sector globally. First step there is the Net Zero Steel Initiative in which we work, but I think also this is just a starting point. All this has to go further. Another area will be creating lead markets for green products, and here we have the EU-US agreement as a very, very important first step. And one result in this context probably will be that we have to define standards, how to measure carbon intensity of steel, of aluminum, of other products, which then can be referenced in trade agreements, but also business to business collaboration along value chains. And I think the last point, which is not so much discussed yet, is collaboration in developing skills and knowledge. So it very much happens, or it happens in the academic world. But I also think, when we look at our site, we have a site to transform with some 18,000 employees. We are already today thinking, the skills our colleagues, our staff has today will have to change. If we change technology from coal-based blast furnace technology to hydrogen-based direct reduction, people will need new skills. So how do we organize this in the speed so that we have also the people who can run these new technologies, these breakthrough technologies? And I think this is not just an issue we have in our company or in Europe. I think this is potentially a global transition in building the right skills that has to happen. And I see this as a big area for collaboration. But one last word, there's lots of opportunities, lots of potential, but there is some water to be poured in the wine. As long, especially in the steel industry, we face overcapacities in the world. We face issues with competition in Europe from countries where the climate ambitions are still lower than in our part of the world. And this is an issue to overcome. So we very much believe, nevertheless, that we need to come at some point, rather sooner than later, to international CO2 pricing in order to align on the objectives, but also on some of the critical instruments in order to create level playing field and fair competition. So it's a big issue for us in the steel industry, like in some other energy intense sectors. But again, looking at the EU-US agreement, I think this is it's a sign an example how things can be addressed and how things should be addressed.
Erica, thank you. That was very, very helpful. It was very good. So much kind of concrete depth there on those specifics you're able to outline, and I think that I'm sure we may well have some questions on some of that. And I each one of them we could unpack. I'm slightly going to unfairly come to you with a very general question, but a question that I'm really interested to get your perspective on, because I think once you're here in Glasgow, it's very easy to get drawn into a bit of a bubble. There's a COP26 bubble. You're kind of part of a kind of community. Everybody's talking to it. Everybody self-group think takes on. You're not here. You've talked about some of the announcements and ambitions that are happening at this moment. How are you feeling about the overall global energy around these kind of questions? Are you feeling optimistic at this point? Are you feeling like we're moving in the right direction? Do you think are you feeling frustrated that more isn't happening? Just interested in your thoughts.
Well, I'm by nature optimistic, and I think we must be optimistic and we must remain optimistic but at the same time, we have to go beyond words. You know, we have been at previous COPs, agreements have been made, pledges have been made, but we are not always following through to really measure it. So, you know, what have we achieved? And generally the feeling is we are too slow. And I think that's probably what we all share. We have to get faster, we have to speed up, and we really have to put action behind the words and the pledges we are making.
Thank you, Erica. I'm going to move us on to our next voice and our next remote participant. But we've given you a lot of European voices so far, and this is all about international collaboration. So if we just had European voices, we would be only telling you half the story. So we're lucky enough to be joined by a representative of Japanese business, the co-chair of the Japan Climate Leadership Partnership, which is a sister group to CLG Europe and a very active friend. Kohori Miyake, who is the sustainability leader for Aon. And who has a wealth of experience and depth on these kind of questions. Lovely. I mean, we've already heard reference to the EU-Japan Green Alliance and how that's an interesting example of new collaboration. Kind of over to you in terms of your thoughts on this question about how, you know, the opportunities to move forward, how things are going, all of those kind of questions.
Thank you. Hi. Hello, and I'm also unfortunately from Japan, but I'm happy to be here. My name is Kohori Miyake, and I serve as a co-chair of a business coalition called Japan Climate Leaders Partnership, JCLP in short. It's a cross-sector coalition of approximately 200 Japanese and international corporations committed to driving urgent climate action in Japan and abroad. It is a great pleasure for me to be here today on this splendid occasion. This April, the Japanese government has committed to reducing its GHG emissions by 46% relative to 2013 and to strive towards 50%. This target is still not yet compatible with the 1.5 degree, but I feel that this is a step forward in the right direction, and Japan is witnessing unprecedented positive change. What is inspiring such change? One of the enabling factors is voices from business sector, including JCLPs. During the revision process of NDC and Business Energy Plan, we demonstrated corporate willingness to decarbonize our own operations through initiatives such as RV100 and signaled strong support for more ambitious climate policy. Our communication with policymakers included direct dialogue with the Prime Minister Suga himself, and we urged his government to show a clear commitment to a vision for the nation. Why would a business actor like JCLP go so far as to make such a bold ask to the head of the state? There are two important drivers behind this. One is the engagement on companies' climate action by investors, which is often led by European investors. I'm sure I don't have to explore too much on this, but let me just stress that it made a difference when investors started asking businesses for concrete actions and measures rather than merely declaring the net zero targets. Another driver is Green Deal, EU's Green Deal. Carbon border adjustment mechanisms, ban on internal combustion engines, and LCA-based regulations have been seen as particularly material to Japanese economy and have been effective in its spurring change in corporate behaviors. In order to maintain the level playing field and market alignment, the business sector is demonstrating increasing support for stronger climate policies, including the introduction of carbon pricing. Indeed, JCLP has referred to EU's Green Deal in our proposals, urging the government for parallel efforts. It is true that some people are still a little skeptical of the Green Deal and its progressiveness, particularly of the taxonomy and bans on ice, and are even talking about developing an alternative taxonomy for Asia. However, the world's economies are more interwoven than ever. JCLP believes that creating another taxonomy is neither beneficial for the Japanese economy nor effective for tackling climate change collectively and swiftly. Much of this kind of reaction is prompted by apprehension about repercussion on Japanese industries. However, achieving the 1.5-degree target means radically shifting our way of life, which inevitably necessitates deep structural change. Shying away from it is not an option, so the question is not about how to avoid it, but about how to do it in a just manner. It is about time for Japan to bring just transition to the forefront of our discussion, and there is much to learn from EU's Green Deal. Going forward, understanding EU's measures for just transition, as well as exchanging views and insights on the topic, could be the key for policy coordination between EU and Japan. And such exchange on just transition can and should take place not only between policymakers, but also between business and policymakers as well. How can business engage effectively? What should we be careful of? I very much would hope to have opportunities to discuss these questions with leaders from EU in the near future. To some, Japan may look somewhat behind in this race to zero, particularly in terms of renewable energy, at least as of now. But I assure you that we still got the skills to sharpen up technologies and make them more effective and accessible. With such strength, I believe Japan can and will contribute more to this multilateral effort to achieving a net zero world. Thank you very much. And this is just a side note, but please do invite JCLP as a Japanese counterpart whenever you play in collaborative business initiatives between the EU and Japan in the near future. We'll be able to play an active role as a bridge between EU and Japanese businesses towards a net zero world. Thank you.
Thank you, Kahori. And that's very powerful. And I think we definitely get this sense of maybe starting a little bit behind, but accelerating very rapidly. And so no doubt that there will be, catching up and potentially overtaking other actors in this genuine race to zero. So that's very exciting to hear. You talked a little bit about having new kind of collaboration between business and policymakers. Do you have particular forums in mind, or do you think that maybe we need to find new ways to have businesses and policymakers sit down and discuss these topics? Because after all, we are building a new economy. What's your thoughts on that?
Yes, there have been new approach, or there's been new group like JCLP. We are a business coalition, but when you talk about business coalition, there are some sectors who are reluctant, and there are sectors who are leading companies. And the policymakers should be able to hear both sides of the story and make the right decision. And I think JCLP was very good in that sense that we voiced our views that we should not be left in this world economy, and that was one thing that was new to, and also it affected the policymakers in Japan. I think this time in bringing up the NDCs. So that's one thing. I think we also have to discuss about the concrete ideas about just transition, something like just transition. We cannot avoid talking about just transition. And I think these are the things that we have to bring up with the communication with the policymakers.
Thank you so much for that, and I'm sure we'll come back to you when we get some more interactive questions. But if it's okay, I'm going to move on to our next speaker. That's been great to hear from you. I'm coming back into the room, but for another international perspective. So we're very pleased to be joined by Joanne Jowich, who is the CEO of the National Business Initiative in South Africa. So another kind of collaborative business grouping, and another kind of long-standing partner, particularly through the Women Business Coalition that both NBI is supported by and part of, and so is the CLG Europe. So a very kind of very good warm welcome to you. We've just been hearing, just transition has been mentioned several times, in particular in the context of the EU South Africa or the South African Energy Transitions Agreement and all of those kind of things. So it's a key topic, and I know that a number of people in the country and in the region talk about that a lot. But I mean, interested to hear your thoughts on that, but your thoughts generally on this topic around better international collaborations, more international collaborations, how we can go further and faster together.
Okay, thanks, Elliot. And there was we talked about earlier on about the Just Energy transaction that Eskom and the South African government have entered into with the EU, the UK, France, Germany, and the US. Which hopefully over time is going to result in an accelerated decarbonisation of South Africa's coal-fired electricity sector, and is going to result in, hopefully by 2030, around 2030, 2035, result in 22 gigawatts of coal-fired power being taken off the grid. There's a lot of devil in the detail that is going to have to be pinned down in order to be able to decide eventually how that $8.5 billion are going to be spent, and in particular what is going to happen first. But I think central to that is the issue of the just transition, which you're raising. And for context, South Africa has about 100,000 workers in the coal value chain. And given levels of unemployment and poverty and inequality in South Africa, each one of those people probably has anything between 5 to 10 dependents, a large number of them young people. And so when you talk about phasing out coal, you're talking about not only an entire value chain and the workers in that industry, but you're also talking about very large-scale impacts to very poor communities. And so the issue of ensuring that there is a process for social protection for those communities, for processes of training and skilling to be able to empower the young people, in particular in those communities, as well as existing workers, to find new jobs in new industries is going to be critical. And the collaboration, I think, in this context between the EU and South Africa is something, I think, where the just transition issues have been placed at the center of it. But I do think to talk a little bit about the drivers in South Africa and the opportunity in relation to decarbonization. And I think that one of the issues that has driven South African business to adopt pathways that look towards 2050 net zero transition has really been an understanding of what is happening internationally. And on the one hand, there is a set of stick mechanisms. So, for example, talk of the European border tax adjustments, the US talking about that as well, is in terms of trade relations, making in energy-intensive industry in South Africa say that change must come, it must come sooner rather than later. But clearly on the other side, there are the opportunities, and the ThyssenKrupp input around green hydrogen and the possibilities for green steel is for South Africa, for example, a very, very big opportunity, because the renewable potential in South Africa is so large, and because of the fact that, ironically, Sasol, which is one of our biggest point sources of greenhouse gases, also has experience in the Fischer-Tropsch technology that is critical in terms of being able to produce green hydrogen. But there's devil in the detail, and in this case, I think that the regulatory frameworks in in Europe in this case, need to take into account what it's going to actually take to be able to phase out a fossil fuel intensive industry and transform it into a green industry, and to be able to ensure that the regulatory frameworks around that are actually supportive of the process, because that process is not, you're not going to stop producing emissions from coal or gas one day and start producing emissions from green hydrogen the next. You're going to have a phase in and phase out process. And in our assessment, there are problems with, in particular, European certification systems that would inhibit the ability to run that phase in and phase out in a way that is actually going to support those industries to get off the ground. So I think there is a lot of work to be done. But I think that what has happened in the last year, and my own organization has done a lot of work with business leaders and CEOs in South Africa to be able to define the net zero 2050 pathways. And I think that on the basis of that, there is probably on balance a real world of opportunity that exists in terms of building global north-south relationships and doing it in a way that really does accelerate decarbonization globally.
Thank you, Joanna. Joanne, I think that's, you've touched on something as you finished there that I think feels very fundamental to the conversation here. We often end up in at these big international moments in unfortunately a rather polarized space. There is these questions around, this is a global problem, we need to build global solidarity, global collaboration to address it, I think as Julius was talking about. But often it's sort of, the debate comes as, are those with doing enough to help those without? And what's interesting about the energy transitions agreement that you've been talking about is it's a great concrete example of cutting through that dynamic. Do you think there's the potential for more of those kind of activities, or even maybe a need for more of those kind of activities?
Absolutely. I think that we're at the very beginning of the process. And I think that one can't underestimate what it has taken to be able to get the big emitters in the South African economy to see themselves as industries and sectors that have a zero carbon future. And with that understanding, and with I suppose there's a deep foundation of technical and other expertise that has underpinned that work. So it hasn't been done, it's not just a high-level plan. We've worked with industry expertise to say, what does it practically mean in order to be able to do that? And so the conclusions that have been reached have resonated quite deeply into industry. And the question now is, how are we going to get the support, the financing, the technical collaborations, the partnerships that are going to enable that understanding, and the kind of plans that have been developed to take off, to get off the ground in a way that really does gain traction on the one hand, but also expand in a much broader way across the economy. So I think there is a world of opportunity, but there is a lot of very, very detailed and practical work that is going to have to happen in order to make it real.
That's a key point. Thank you so much. So we've not got too long left, but we have already got a number of questions through the Slido mechanism, so I can see people are using that system, and they're using the outvoting thing to kind of say which questions are kind of key as well. So we'll see how many of these we can deal with, and indeed, if please do file more and use the voting system if you want to comment and shape our last kind of 10 minutes, if you like. So I want to focus with the top question: what is the best way to share and potentially replicate success stories across different continents? I feel like that's a lot of what we've been sort of exploring and talking about already. Maybe it's always hard to kind of bring in voices who are not in the room. So maybe if I could start with those who aren't in the room. Kahore, can I come back to you? What do you think about this question?
It's a good question. We can use like something like these. Japan, I think from my point of view, we don't have a lot of access to global information. That's one of the weak points it just doesn't come in flowing by sitting here. So something, occasions like this, meetings, any opportunities to exchange ideas with other coalitions, network, global network, please keep in touch, because that is the road to our access to the information. And when we have more information coming into this country, I think there's a lot of things that a Japanese company can do. But I think that's one of the things that I feel very important from my point of view.
That's really good, and I think it's interesting. It's an interesting counterpoint to a criticism that is often made and has been made of moments like this. There's a lot of talking. Actually, talking helps communicate. It's one of our kind of key technologies as human beings. It's actually a really, really valuable thing. And if you want change to happen, you need understanding. You need that flow of information, and we need moments where you can build that collaboration, build that dialogue. Maybe Erica, maybe I could go to you and interested in your thoughts on this question around sharing and replicating success stories, but also there's a question about how does the Green Deal encourage companies to make their international value chains more sustainable and climate friendly? So sharing success stories, making value chains more sustainable. Your thoughts on either of those questions?
Yeah, I really think, we have by now really all understood, what needs to happen. And I think the Green Deal, it is such a comprehensive piece of policy which alludes to the different aspects, and the different sectors that each one has to play their part. But again, in order to get more granular, I think we need to see, can we do sectorial or issue-specific coalitions? And with coalitions, I really mean, sitting down with policymakers and businesses and the unions. We talked about just transition, and the colleague from Japan underlined that aspect as well, to really see how do we bring it to life. I think, we have good concepts, but we have solutions, but it's now the point to really see, how do we make things work? And it has to be concrete, and it has to be specific. And in Germany right now, the discussion goes around a what we call a transformation alliance, or something of that nature. Again, with the concept to see, to based on the policies and the political goals defined, how do we bring it to life? What are the next steps? What is in terms? If we look at the steel industry, how do we get the finance? What is how can we get public support? What is industry going to deliver in return? Then I think we have to come to those concrete plans and master plans in order to move forward. So it has to be really concrete and specific at this point.
Thank you, Erica. And then so I'm going to come, I think we've got these three questions, and the third one is, how do we best unlock trillions? Erica just talked about mobilizing the finance. I want to hear from all the panelists on the stage with me if possible, so kind of try and keep it fairly concise. Maybe, probably easiest to move down the stage, so you don't have to answer all of these questions, but just, let's keep on adding to the knowledge. And maybe if I start with you, Julius.
Well, maybe just one remark in terms of the just energy transition partnership, which we have to see, as you say, how it will unfold. It has great potential, but it's difficult. There's just the declaration now, and we have 12 months, I think, to make this operational, and there are many issues there. The just transition component has been mentioned, is very much there. So I think there's clear awareness that that's important, but it's also about enabling environments, about governance. It's about all these things, but it will be a great example if we can make that work. And that's what we hope, of course. We can also replicate this type of model with other countries. It was very important for the EU to be part of the partnership. The European Investment Bank has put, I believe, more than $1 billion on the table in terms of loans to support this. So it will be a great experience to see, talking about concrete sectoral things. This is one that we hope will work.
I'm just going to, before we hear any more from you, I think we have a question in the room, so I don't know if we can quickly take.
Yes, hi. So this is a question for Julius. So in the very beginning of the presentation, you said that these net zero goals of the EU are legally binding. So I'm just wondering if you could just explain a little bit more what that actually entails. What happens if member states or indeed the whole EU does not live up to these net zero goals? What actually happens?
Okay, maybe that's something we can discuss outside of this room, because it's a wholly different topic, of course. And I'm just.
Okay, I'm seeing a nod, so let's go with that. I think partly so we can bring this in. So is it okay if I don't know if I slightly cut you off there, Julius, but I don't know if you had more that you wanted to say on the topic, or if I could just go and hear from my last two colleagues. So Miguel.
I think it's very important in general, if you want to mobilize investment, to have robust policy signals. Not only goals, robust policy signal, stable frameworks. Taxation should be fully aligned with the climate goals, environmental tax reforms, a proper functioning of markets, energy markets, different markets. So, and I think the enabling conditions that have already been mentioned by the European Commission are a good ground to start providing these signals to investors in the path to climate neutrality.
Thank you, Miguel. Joanne.
How do you unlock the trillion? So I think the one part of that is really about ensuring that the way the public and the private sector are working together is optimal. I mean, we talk a lot about blended finance, but being able to, I suppose, put a concrete, tangible plan to what that actually means, I think, is quite central to it. And I think the second part of it is really the enabling environment and the right mixture of both incentives and disincentives are going to be quite central in allowing industry to move on the one hand, allowing government to come in behind them and put in the right kind of policy framework, and then in ensuring that in relation to that you can form the kinds of collaborations that are necessary in order to actually spend the trillions if we can really mobilize them. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And so, I mean, it's difficult to do justice to that conversation because it has been so rich, and I think we've heard so much in terms of different kinds of collaborations, different practical actions, delving into the detail of particular sectors. So I'm not going to even attempt to it. I just want to add a new topic, if you like, or a new angle to this. I think we've heard in that the opportunities that come from moving forward, some of the challenges in terms of moving forward at speed. I think the other thing that we do have to remember is, we do need to move forward at speed. So there is this kind of need to deliver this transformation. We are in the conversation which is all about the need to deliver change, not just change effectively, not just change inclusively and justly, which we also need to do, but we do need to do it quickly because, this problem is not going away. People are suffering from it right now. The economies are suffering from it right now. So I just want to finish on that note. It's a huge opportunity I think we've heard about, and a huge kind of positive energy in terms of that growing level of collaboration. We just need to do more, and we need to do it quicker. Thank you very much.